Tonight on Bridge City News, a Cardston man who is charged with illegally selling firearms has his day in court. RCMP are looking for a Blood Tribe man in connection with a weekend shooting on the Blood Reserve. And former Humboldt Bronco Ryan Strechnitsky returned home to Alberta and talks about the spinal surgery he underwent in Thailand.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Cardston man who was accused of illegally selling from a gun store had his day in court today. BCN's Loris Alexander was at Lethbridge Court and has the details.
The courtroom was packed with supporters for Dean Sommerfeld. Sommerfeld was charged in spring 2017, accused of selling guns and ammunition illegally. Court heard that on several occasions, customers and undercover police officers were sold ammunition without having a possession and acquisition license known as PAL. Sommerfeld will be back in court on January 13th.
Police are looking for a Blood Tribe man following a shooting over the weekend at the Blood Reserve. Authorities say a 41-year-old man was shot and airlifted to a Calgary hospital with life-threatening injuries. The RCMP Major Crimes Unit is asking for help in locating 29-year-old Kyle Lewis Crowchief, who's facing a charge of attempted murder. Crowchief is listed as 6 feet tall, weighs 150 pounds, with brown eyes and brown shoulder-length hair. He was last seen driving a black Jeep Compass with Alberta license plate BVD 9815. He's also believed to be in possession of a firearm. If you've seen Crowchief, do not approach him, but call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. The investigation into the disappearance of Marshall Iwasa continues. Iwasa left Lethbridge on November 17th, headed to Calgary, but he never arrived. His burned-out truck was found on November 25th near Pemberton, BC. Police say the search for Iwasa has been put on hold until they get more leads. Marshall Iwasa's sister, Paige Fogan, says she's thankful that so many people have helped, but this is still a very tough time for her family.
Yeah, it has been really difficult. We really have been leaning on each other quite a bit, for support, and it's been really great seeing all the community support that we've received. We have people reaching out to us daily, offering their support, and the biggest thing for us is offering to help spread the word about Marshall and his photo and his flyers.
The Find Marshall Iwasa Facebook group now has 5,300 members, with many saying they have shared updates and posted his photo in various communities. According to Maclean's Magazine's annual report on Canada's most dangerous places, Lethbridge ranked 15th overall for common assaults and reported break-and-enters. That's an increase from our 19th ranked position last year. We asked downtown shoppers how safe they feel with a recent increase in crime and what needs to be done to tackle that crime.
I don't really think the violence and all the talk, I don't think it's warranted. It's everywhere in Lethbridge. It's not just downtown. Downtown is perfectly safe. I'll walk here even in the dark to go get my vehicle every night. It's just never been a problem for me.
I think it's a negative perception at the moment, but I would like to change that. As a person who spends a lot of time downtown and a person who walks downtown a lot, I'd say that it's as safe as it has ever been, if not even safer.
We haven't seen a decrease in traffic because of the downtown violence. Actually, our store does pretty good, and we do good encouraging all the other stores to work as a community together, and we've seen a lot more traffic from that too.
Absolutely. Everything helps. We've had a couple evening shopping things for the children. We're going to have one another next week, Thursday. We're going to have another late night shopping for the kids and for the adults. It all helps. It brings people down. People are excited for that, and they love coming after hours, and we give hot chocolate and cookies, and who doesn't like that?
It has been very successful for us. We've promoted it, and we are finding a lot of people coming in. Yesterday we stayed open till 9, and I had something like 30 people come in, which for me is huge.
I believe we have a pretty steady clientele, and the days don't really increase or decrease traffic at all.
Lethbridge City Council met today to look at 2 new reports addressing the drug-related crime and social issues our city has been facing.
One of the things that gets lost in our business quite regularly is the impact and the workload on our non-police staff. And our staff, I would suggest, are equally overworked, equally stressed and strained as our front line is dealing with this crisis. And the reality is the more officers you hire or bring into an organization, the more work that gets put down the line to those people that aren't police officers. More reports we write, more people bring them into custody, more resources we require to deal with IT needs, more computers. All those things flow down, and they often get forgot. And that's an unfortunate thing, because this resolution was specific to 8 officers, but those issues need to be addressed as well within our police service.
Well, what I hope that it means is more resources for the police service. Honestly, I think we've been working pretty hard with the city and with the police service itself to try and procure the number of resources that we need to offer the services that the city deserves, particularly in light of what the conditions are in our community right now.
It appears as though more people may be finding jobs in southern Alberta. According to Stats Canada, the unemployment rate for the Lethbridge Medicine Hat region dropped to 4.9% in November. Now that's an improvement of the October rate of 6.4%. The overall Alberta unemployment rate jumped a half a percentage point, however, up to 7.2% with a loss of 18,000 jobs. Nationally, the Canadian economy shed over 71,000 jobs in November, with the unemployment rate at 5.9%. The Alberta government is putting more money into anti-bullying initiatives. Minister of Education Adriana LaGrange said the province will be providing a grant of $300,000 over the next 4 years to support the Respect in School initiative. It educates school system employees on their responsibilities to ensure students are safe from abusive situations. The program will train teachers, school bus drivers, and parent volunteers about how they can prevent bullying, harassment, and discrimination in their schools. The province also has an anti-bullying helpline set up at 1-888-456-2323. The Fair Deal panel is touring the province, asking Albertans on how to best define and secure a fair deal for our province. A town hall meeting will go tonight in Red Deer from 6:30 till 8:30 p.m. at the Westerner Park Prairie Pavilion. Seating is limited, so if you are planning to attend, you have to register. In addition to receiving input from Albertans, the Fair Deal panel will consult with policy experts and undertake research to inform its recommendations. The panel will complete its report and present it to the government by the end of March. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is in Ottawa today. He and 8 of his cabinet ministers are in the nation's capital as part of a trip to meet their federal counterparts. He's to meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tomorrow to talk about potential changes to the Fiscal Stabilization Fund. The fund helps provinces facing year-over-year declines in non-resource revenues. Our province says it is being shortchanged due to caps tied to the size of our population. The Trudeau Liberals tabled legislation earlier today to deliver a tax break to all but high-income earners. The break is set to take effect in January and raise the basic personal income tax exemption from $12,000 to $15,000. It is designed to save the average family around $585 a year.
We know that the very first thing that we want to move forward in is a reduction in taxes for middle-class Canadians. It's why today we are moving forward with that as the first order of business. The way we're going to do that is by taking the basic personal exemption, the amount that people can deduct so that they don't actually have to pay taxes until they hit that amount. We're going to raise that amount. We're going to raise that amount to $15,000 between here and 2023. We know that that will have an important impact.
Marneau says the change will affect around 20 million Canadians. He also announced he will deliver an update on the government's finances sometime before Christmas. An Alberta hockey player who was paralyzed following the Humboldt Broncos bus crash says he feels good after receiving spinal surgery in Thailand. Ryan Strachnitsky said he was glad to feel a cold Canadian winter as he and his father Tom landed at the Calgary airport last night. He had an epidural stimulator implanted in his spine, which allowed him to strengthen his leg and walk with assistance. It was a procedure which cost his family $100,000.
Feel good to be home?
Yeah, it feels good. I mean, I felt that cold wind hit my legs, so I'm feeling good. Feeling good to be back. So the first time I moved my legs was pretty incredible. I didn't necessarily feel it, but they set the right program for a certain muscle to move, and it was crazy. I mean, at the first few weeks, the muscles were pretty weak, but over time, through lots of physio, they got really strong. It's a weird technique. They kind of said you had to breathe with the motion, and it took a while to get down, but they set all the programs, and I'm ready to go. I think just getting that, feeling back of being able to move something that I wasn't able to move before, and I know core is a huge part of my disability, so anything below my chest is crucial, and after the programming, it really helped.
A Canadian Pacific freight train hauling crude oil derailed near Humboldt, Saskatchewan earlier today, sparking a fire and closing a highway. RCMP say traffic along Highway 16 was blocked in both directions between Guernsey and Plunkett due to the smoke. CP Rail says no injuries were reported. It says emergency and hazmat crews were working with local first responders to assess and minimize any impact to the area. The House Judiciary Committee in the United States convened to formally receive the investigative findings against U.S. President Donald Trump. Democrats are pushing towards articles of impeachment, and the White House launched an aggressive attack of the proceedings.
No matter his party or his politics, if the president places his own interests above those of the country, he betrays his oath of office. The President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader of the Senate, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the Chairman and Ranking Members of the House Committee on the Judiciary all have one important thing in common. We have each taken an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. If the President puts himself before the country, he violates the President's most basic responsibility. He breaks his oath to the American people.
A recent investigation by the Associated Press found law enforcement officers in the United States accidentally fire their weapons every year, resulting in injuries and deaths. As we hear in this next report, experts say it's the result of a lack of training.
Oh my God.
Officer Jesse Hill was responding to a domestic violence call when he found Gabe Steele outside with his wife Autumn and their 3-year-old son. The family's dog started barking.
Hey, hey!
Hill lost his balance and fired 2 shots.
Get your dog!
One grazed the dog, the other fatally hit Steele.
You shoot her? Did I? Oh my God. Oh my God.
That boy lives with that every day of his life. That shouldn't be his story.
It's also a story few people hear about when it comes to certain police shootings. An Associated Press investigation identified more than 1,400 unintentional discharges of firearms by more than 250 local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies since 2012. The AP found more than 20 cases where people died in those accidental shootings.
Unintentional discharges are actually quite rare, but they're much more common than we would like.
No one tracks negligent shootings by law enforcement, so the AP reviewed media reports, obtained body camera footage, and surveyed agencies across the country. The findings are an undercount since not all agencies were contacted. After a high-speed chase in Minnesota, a sergeant stepped out of his patrol car with his firearm drawn.
Get your hands right, Steele! Hands where I can see him. Hands where I can see him.
Oh, you actually shot me, didn't you?
I'm not going to say anything right now.
Oh, please don't say
anything. But
Yeah, I know.
It was not intentional. I can tell you that.
The AP identified another 134 cases where the officer was injured from the discharge and 45 cases where an accidental shooting injured another officer.
Where are you shot? Hey, relax.
That's what happened at a Texas high school when heavily armed officers and agents responded to a shooting. A U.S. Marshal accidentally shot a Homeland Security officer in the leg during the search for the shooter. Experts say the current methods used to train officers are inadequate. Doug Tangen says once cadets leave the academy, they rarely receive ongoing training.
These are all complex psychomotor skills. And if you know anything about psychomotor skills and motor learning, they take maintenance or they just go away.
And I think I hit her, Sergeant. I don't know where.
The officer in Steele's death was never charged, but the family reached a $2 million settlement with the city in 2018. As for the little boy who witnessed his mom's shooting,
He says he wants to be a cop when he grows up, because he wants to get rid of the bad ones, which I can understand. You know, he's had pretty bad experience with police officers.
an experience Steele hopes will bring changes to police training. Krista Fourier, Associated Press, Burlington, Iowa.
A volcano in New Zealand erupted, spewing smoke, while dozens of tourists were exploring it earlier today. At least one death has been confirmed. The site was still too dangerous hours later for police and rescuers to search for the missing people. Police say 23 people were taken from White Island, some with serious injuries. Some of the missing were guests from the Royal Caribbean International cruise ship Ovation of the Seas. The Puppeteers, which brought you Cookie Monster and Elmo, call former Big Bird actor Carol Spinney an inspiration and a genius. Spinney passed away yesterday at the age of 85. Spinney, who grew up in Massachusetts, said in a 2014 interview that his father was born in New Brunswick and his mother grew up in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia.
Carol was an incredible person. Not only was he a coworker of mine, but he was an inspiration to me as a child and a friend. And we're still reeling a little bit, and I think the world's really gonna miss what he brought to it. So we're just thankful, and he's here tonight. He's here tonight.
Carol Spinney was a big inspiration in my life. I've known Carol for over 30 years, and he's just a genius, sweet man, and so funny and talented, and I'm going to miss him a lot.
You know, Big Bird was always one of my favorite Muppet characters, so colorful. We had a mainly cloudy day today in the Windy City with some light flurries in some areas. The flurries should be tapering off. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. We had lots of clouds and light snow again today. Tonight, the flurries should dissipate with a low near -7. Tomorrow, mainly cloudy with a high expected near -2. The sunshine should return on Wednesday with a high near 0. The mercury will climb all the way up to 6 degrees on Thursday. Cooling off slightly under a mainly cloudy sky and a high of 3 degrees on Friday. Saturday cooling off to -2. And Sunday overcast with a high again near -2 degrees. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 0 and an average low of -11. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1957 at 14 degrees. And the record low was -37 in 1977. Sunrise was at 8:16, sunset at 4:31. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, expect rain and a high of 8 degrees for Victoria. Showers and 7 for Vancouver. Mainly cloudy, -2 on tap for Calgary on Tuesday. A chance of flurries at -13 for Edmonton. Mainly sunny and -20 for both Regina and Saskatoon. Just a few clouds and -19 is on tap for Winnipeg. A chance of flurries and +1 for Toronto tomorrow. Rain mixed with snow and a high near 6 degrees for Ottawa. Rain and 9 degrees for Montreal. Over the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick had a rainfall warning today. Tomorrow, a chance of showers again and a high near 10. Rain and 12 degrees for Halifax, Nova Scotia. A slight chance of showers and 11 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 10 degrees for tomorrow. The numbers are in from Stats Canada as to the numbers of potato crops planted this year. The federal agency says 360,000 acres of potato crops were planted, which is a 3.7% increase, but more than 20,000 acres could not be harvested. Farmers in Alberta and Manitoba planted a lot more potato crops to feed the demand created by the new French fry manufacturing plants here in Lethbridge and in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. Alberta's harvest was hampered by a late September snowstorm, while Manitoba faced a dry growing season. An estimated 13,000 acres of potato crops were abandoned in Manitoba earlier this year. That was more than half the national total. Canadian Pacific Railway says it moved more Canadian grain and grain products in November than any month in its history. CP Rail says it delivered 2.74 million metric tons during November, beating the October 29 all-time record of 2.66 million. It also says more CP carloads of grain were unloaded at the Port of Thunder Bay during the November 18th week than in any other prior week. The railway says its customer terminals in Thunder Bay unloaded a record 2,216 cars that week. The previous record was 2,144 cars set in the fall of 2017. There's a strong push to have Canada invest more in solar power and wind farms to help cut down on its carbon footprint. Cody Battershill is the founder of Canada Action, a grassroots organization that supports Canada's energy industry. Cody says green technology is good, but it's important not to put all of our eggs in that green basket.
As Albertans and as Canadians, we can be proud. Alberta had Canada's first wind farm in 1993. We're building Canada's largest solar farm right now. But wind and solar today is not ready, according to Bill Gates, because battery storage is not technologically feasible yet. So as long as the world needs oil and gas, which will be for decades to come, we have to choose if we want to support the best producer with the highest environmental standards, or if we want to bench Canada, and that only benefits other countries, and that is bad for the environment.
Watch the entire interview with Cody Battershill and BCN's Paul Arthur discussing the delicate balance between green technology and our energy industry. That's coming up after Business News. A Chinese deputy commerce minister says Beijing wants a quick settlement of its trade war with Washington. Another U.S. tariff hike on $160 billion worth of Chinese imports is due to take effect on Sunday. China announced last week that it was carrying out a promise to waive punitive tariffs on American soybeans and pork. U.S. President Donald Trump alarmed global financial markets last week when he said he might be willing to wait until after the next year presidential election to reach a settlement. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 46 points on the day to 16,950. The Dow was down 105 points to 27,909. The S&P 500 was down almost 10 points to 3135, and the Nasdaq was also down on the day, almost 35 points to 8621. Oil was down 29 cents to 58.91 per barrel. Natural gas was down 8 cents to 2.25. Gold was up 83 cents to 14.6244 an ounce, and silver was down 6 cents to 16.61 an ounce. Wheat is at $227 per metric ton. Barley's at $230. Canola's at $4.56. And corn is at $276 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 25 cents on the day to 120.83. Feeder cattle were down 25 cents to 142.15, and lean hogs were down $1.13 to 60.90. The Canadian dollar was up slightly on the day to 75.54 US. We have breaking news for you this hour. Lethbridge police have charged 2 men in connection with the vicious assault of a 37-year-old man at Galt Gardens on Friday morning. 43-year-old Stephen Gordon, Quebec, and 19-year-old Dre Cade Sweetgrass, both of Lethbridge, have been charged with aggravated assault and robbery. They're both scheduled to appear in court tomorrow. The 37-year-old victim was bear sprayed and struck in the head multiple times, is still recovering in hospital. Police say the matter was drug-related. Green technology is important, but we should not solely rely on it as an energy source. That's according to Cody Battershill, who's the founder of Canada Action, a grassroots organization that supports Canada's energy industry. His interview with BCN's Paul Arthur is coming up. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Bring your whole family to Breakfast with Santa, taking place Saturday, December 14th from 9 a.m. to noon at the Colehurst High School. Enjoy a delicious pancake breakfast, kids crafts, plus get photos taken with Santa and Mrs. Claus. So much to see and do. Cost is $5 per person or $20 for family. All funds will go to support events and activities at the Colehurst High School. For more information, email tgrindle@shaw.ca. Come for an amazing cultural experience. The Lethbridge Symphony Orchestra is presenting the famous oratorio, The Messiah, on Sunday, December 15th at 3 p.m. and Monday, December 16th at 7:30 at Southminster United Church in celebration of the Christmas season. Tickets for Symphony Series 3 can be purchased online by visiting lethbridgesymphony.org. Do you have a knack for wrapping gifts and spreading Christmas cheer? Volunteer Lethbridge is looking for gift wrappers for their holiday gift wrapping fundraiser, taking place from now until December 24th at Park Place Shopping Center. Orientation will be provided. For more information, contact Chelsea at 403-332-4320. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Last summer, the Alberta government launched a public inquiry into the finances of environmental organizations and the funding they get from foreign donors. Now, the province believes these groups are targeting the energy sector with false or misleading information. Joining me from Calgary to talk about this is Cody Battershill, founder of Canada Action, a volunteer-led grassroots movement encouraging Canadians to take action in support of the natural resources sector. Cody, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Well, recently, Eco Justice, an environmental charity group, decided to sue the Alberta government, asking the court to stop this quote-unquote partisan political inquiry into alleged foreign-funded attacks on the oil industry. So, Cody, can you just first of all explain, what is their rationale? Why do they feel they need to intervene in this?
I'm not really too sure, and I think it's concerning because certainly if you look at the work of Vivian Krause, she has shown that Eco-Justice is one group that has in fact received a lot of money from some of these U.S. foundations, these non-Canadian based entities, to attack and to attempt to block Canadian energy infrastructure like pipelines, Trans Mountain, like LNG pipelines and projects like LNG Canada. And, we've seen obviously all of these problems in our sector, and the result is that other countries are helping fill global supply and Canadian families are left out, and this is not good for the global environment. I think it's concerning that they've, of course they're going to want to challenge this because it seems like, according to this research, that they're actually a part of it.
Yeah, and when you look at what's happening to the Alberta economy and real life impacting families who rely on the oil and gas industry to feed their families, yeah, it is very concerning. Now, let me just backpedal for a moment here as well. What does the Alberta government hope to accomplish, realistically speaking, with a public inquiry?
Well, at the end of the day, as Albertans, we own most of the resource, and it's the government that manages it, and then companies develop it. They lease it, they create jobs, and they pay royalties and taxes, and that pays for our quality of life, like schools and education and hospitals and first responders and emergency responders and roads, stuff that we all rely on. It's very important. So if we are not getting the best possible price for our resources because of a fear-driven campaign to block our infrastructure, to keep us landlocked, I think it is in the public good, it is in the public interest to have a clear understanding of the facts, the players, and the people behind it. We know it's very well publicized that they have been operating this campaign for more than a decade, and in their own words, they say the goal from the very beginning was to landlock Canadian oil and gas to keep us out of international markets where we would get a higher price.
Yeah, let's talk a bit more about that. Now, this is all tied into something called the tar sands campaign. Now, for any viewers who might not be familiar with that, and again, there's been some excellent research done by Vivian Krause, you mentioned her earlier. Can you explain exactly what that whole campaign is? And the fact is that they were actually quite vocal about it, even bragging about some of their accomplishments, right?
Absolutely. So going back to roughly 2008, there was a group of people that got together in the United States, and in their own words on their website where they were bragging about what they did, they mobilized and organized to block all Canadian pipelines. And in the last 10 years, they have been successful. We've seen all Canadian pipelines blocked. We have seen Canadian oil with the highest environmental standards on earth selling at the world's cheapest price, the biggest discount. And we have seen Canadian families in the energy sector and also small businesses, restaurant owners, retail owners, and our public sector all impacted because we are selling our resources at an unnecessary discount while other countries are selling their resources for the full price. And so this campaign, they brag about it. They take credit for all of the work they've done. And it's really concerning. We need to get the facts on the table. I think that is the purpose of this inquiry. And anyone who wants to have a balanced, informed, or honest conversation should be fully supportive of seeking to understand who has been behind this and the funding and the organizational structure so that as Albertans, as Canadians, we can understand who has been torquing this conversation and blocking our pipelines.
I guess one of the questions that comes out of this here, Cody, is, is this simply done for environmental reasons? And I'm sure there are some people who are passionate about the environment and who really are genuinely doing it that way. But another question that can come out of this is is it possible that there's a more self-serving profit motive behind some of this tar sands campaign here? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I can't say for certain. I don't think there's a smoking gun. But I think if you look at the facts, Keystone XL was originally proposed about 10 years ago. And Keystone XL has been blocked by all of these groups, the same groups that blocked Energy East and Northern Gateway, and they're fighting Trans Mountain and everything else. At the same time that they're fighting Keystone XL, they did absolutely nothing to oppose in a similar fashion other oil imports coming to North America, coming to the United States, coming to Canada. So Canada loses and other countries benefit. And that is the fact of the matter when you look at what's happened in the world. Global oil demand has increased by 6 or 7 million barrels per day since Keystone XL was first blocked. And the US is still importing heavy oil, but not from Canada, not oil that Canada could displace with Keystone XL. They're getting it from countries like Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and other places. So, when you do look at the big picture, it's really curious that Canada has been targeted like nowhere else on earth. And that includes ignoring oil imports coming to Canada and American tankers on the West Coast and American tankers in our waterways as well. It's really curious what they focused on and everything else that they omit.
Yeah, it is very curious. I mean, again, that's why I'm asking the question, is there a smoking gun somewhere? You got to follow the money trail. So this inquiry, in that sense, may bring some light to the matter. I mean, I don't know for sure, but are there some, who's funding this? And if those people happen to be, I don't know, let's say, possibly investing, do they have investments in the oil industry themselves, let's say in the States? And, blocking the Canadian competition, does that benefit them? I mean, I don't know for sure, but certainly within the realm of possibility, I would think. And again, as you mentioned, not targeting other countries like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela. I mean, these are states that, you want to talk about dirty oil. Well, these are human beings we're talking about, the citizens living in these countries. Wow, I mean, they are directly majorly impacted by their poor human rights record. Do we want to be buying oil from there, or do we want to be supporting clean oil, here in Canada, where we don't have those kinds of things to worry about?
We are also leading on the climate. We are taking action to reduce emissions, and there are many other countries that have higher emissions per barrel of production, that don't have the same record of investing in clean technology, that don't have the same record of clean electricity as a country, and also that don't have the same record of renewables. As Albertans and as Canadians, we can be proud. Alberta had Canada's first wind farm in 1993. We're building Canada's largest solar farm right now. But wind and solar today is not ready, according to Bill Gates, because battery storage is not technologically feasible yet. So as long as the world needs oil and gas, which will be for decades to come, we have to choose if we want to support the best producer with the highest environmental standards, or if we want to bench Canada, and that only benefits other countries, and that is bad for the environment.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like these kinds of groups seem to delight in calling Alberta oil dirty, and how pipelines will violate the rights of Indigenous peoples, for example. It's not quite like that. I mean, when you do a little bit of digging here, I mean, we see, media sound bites and so forth, but you find out there's, 400 plus, Indigenous groups across Canada, perhaps much larger. I'm not sure. You might know the numbers better than I do. But there's a lot of Indigenous groups that are quite in favor of these pipelines. It's going to be a benefit to their people. And, as long as it's done right, respecting, yes, native rights and so forth. And again, like you point out, respecting the environment as well. I mean, I think our energy groups are bending over backwards to do their best to line up with these international standards where a lot of these other countries are not.
Yeah, and you really touch on a good point there, in that, with Trans Mountain, for example, there's 94% of the Indigenous groups on the pipeline right-of-way that support the project.
94%? Are you serious?
94% on the route. With Northern Gateway, there was 70% of the groups on the route, the communities and the groups on the route that supported the project. When you do look across the country, it has been said by Indigenous leaders, there is between 400 and 500 communities of the 630 communities in total, approximate numbers, that are pro-development as partners with industry in responsible and respectful resource development, because they also want to get their communities out of poverty, and they want to participate in economic and resource development. So the narrative pushed by the anti-pipeline groups, unfortunately, they will take the 6%, and that 6% can have very valid concerns, but they really highlight that 6% on Trans Mountain. They ignore the 94%. And that is not a fair or balanced conversation for the betterment of those communities and for the good of the country. That's the problem. They're only talking about the narrative that fits their anti-everything movement.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I was a Martian, if there is such a thing, paying a visit to Earth, and you read the newspapers, watched the television programs, would that be the impression you'd be left with, what you just explained there, the 94% in favor? No. You'd be thinking it's the opposite, 94% against, if you watch the typical media coverage on that. It really makes you think, doesn't it? One area that often does get brought up, and rightly or wrongly, maybe you can explain, I don't know a lot about it, tailings ponds, and we hear that in a negative context, of course. What are these specifically, and how many of them are there? What is the environmental challenge with these?
Yeah, tailings ponds is often used as an example of where we are not leading on the environmental file, but you do have to have a more nuanced and a broader conversation, Tailings ponds are used in almost all mining operations around the world. Tailings ponds are used in those situations to help recycle water. Tailings ponds are used to store the water, and also, it's been said that if you jump in a mud puddle, when you get home, you would have to rinse off. And it's also been said that if you dipped in a tailings pond, it would be a similar experience. You just want to have a quick rinse when you get home, but it's not going to kill you or poison you necessarily. So at the end of the day, we need to understand that tailings ponds are large. I don't know the total area, but they are quite large. But they are facilitating the recycling of water, and the industry is spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to expedite reclamation of tailings ponds and to continue to improve on environmental performance. Is it perfect today? Maybe not, but we can continue to work on this going forward. And that's really where we should give our industry credit. As the largest funder of all industries in Canada for clean technology and environmental protection, as a huge investor in renewables, as a partner with Indigenous communities, and we have a commitment to continually progress and improve. And that is something that cannot be said or not properly sort of equated around the world with a lot of other countries. We're really leading, and we're really trying to take responsibility. So, on that one specific topic, it's really important that we are having that balanced conversation.
Yeah, another point that comes up often with these tailing ponds is when we read about ducks being killed and so forth, and nobody wants to see that. On the other hand, compared to wind energy, the number of birds and bats, for example, that get killed by those big blades is actually quite high. So something else to consider here as well. The federal Liberals, meanwhile, are saying that perhaps they're going to make some tweaks on the Bill C-69 and Bill C-48, now again known as the anti-oil pipeline bills, right? So now they're saying in how it's implemented, they could make some tweaks, but they're not going to change the legislation. So does this actually offer any real hope, you think?
I mean, right now, what we need to see is Trans Mountain gets built, LNG Canada moves forward. There's some other LNG projects. We need some progress on Keystone XL. Line 3 in the U.S. needs to continue to move forward. And with C-69 and with C-48, they were opposed by a lot of Indigenous communities, and they were opposed by a majority of Canadian premiers representing a large majority of the Canadian population. So we just need to continue to have conversations and try to find common ground. I'm hopeful that the new and the re-elected federal government will continue to see areas for improvement going forward so that we can bring everyone together. At the end of the day, energy is our #1 export. Energy demand is going up. Oil demand and gas demand is increasing and will be around for a long time. And we are only hurting Canadian families by not making sure that we are competitive. We have, of course, seen tens of billions of dollars leave Canada for other countries, companies selling and exiting the country. This is a symptom of the broader conversation. We need to resolve some of these issues on 69 and 48, especially 48, where you have local Indigenous communities saying they were not consulted. So let's just be balanced and continue to move forward so that we can make Canada a good place to invest, which creates jobs for our families and provides for our quality of life.
Just briefly here, I mean, we are seeing significant increases in electric vehicles, green energy availability, and so forth. And we have, some political parties telling us that their goal is to shut down the oil industry. But, going by what you're saying here, there is still a lot of global demand out there that is in need of Canadian oil and gas. And so looking, a decade or two down the road, you think there's enough to keep Alberta oil going?
Absolutely there is, because electric vehicles, everything in our modern world comes from the earth, and you can't make an electric vehicle without oil and gas. Even if it's not directly powered by oil and gasoline, you still need oil and gas and petrochemicals to make it. Also, even if there's a recent model I saw where it said if all of the world's vehicles went electric by 2040, oil demand would still be above 90 million barrels per day. And as long as that's the case, Canada should be the last producer out of the pool, because oil makes a lot of things possible and directly manufactures a lot of things in our modern lives, not just gasoline for vehicles. You have, you look at airplanes, right? There's no replacement today for jet fuel. Heavy trucks and heavy industry. There's a lot of things that we can continue to do that are very reliant on oil and gas. And natural gas, a great example where we can export Canadian natural gas to the world and reduce global emissions. That's why we need to build LNG facilities. We have the cleanest, greenest natural gas on earth. We have the best people working. We have the best standards. We are environmental leaders, and we need to be proud. We need to stand up for that balanced conversation.
Out of time. Thank you so much for your expertise on this, Cody.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Cody Battersill, founder of Canada Action.
Marriage can be difficult at the best of times, and even more so if there's been some form of infidelity. Does this mean that the marriage is over, or is it possible to restore and rejuvenate the relationship? Joining me now to discuss this today is Tina Conkin, a conference speaker, director of Relationship Lifeline, and author of the book, How God Used the Other Woman, Saving Your Marriage After Infidelity. Tina, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's been a few years since I've been on Bridge, but it's good to be back.
How is it that people in good, happy relationships end up cheating?
Well, good, happy has to be described. I believe that quite often, and this is my belief, when we come into marriage, we come in with all of us, the good, the bad, and the ugly, every part of us. And so as we bring things into our marriage, we don't know really what's going to trigger during our relationship. And so even though it seems normal, you seem to have the normal problems that most couples have, and so you keep putting it off as that, there are times where it just falls apart even when it's good.
Can you tell me what happened in your own marriage that led you to write this book?
Yes. So we were that typical good marriage. We were marriage counselors, as a matter of fact. We worked in the counseling field and we helped a lot of families. I was even a children's pastor. My husband was an associate pastor for a long time. And then we broke off into this area of helping the hurting and really helping relationships regain. So how regain momentum, regain love, regain fun. And here we were, in the middle of that, helping others, and we fell apart. And that's when we realized that unresolved baggage from your past comes back to haunt you, honestly does. And so we were in a time that we'd never experienced before. My husband was the fun, loving guy. There was never anything but a good day. Just because you were alive was a good day for him. But he went through a period when his mom was diagnosed with cancer that he didn't know how to deal with that. He'd never really dealt with deep pain. I came from more of a dysfunctional home, and I'd had a lot of moving in my childhood, some bullying. Not him. He was like, the best case scenario was his deal. So the first real pain that he experienced was experiencing his mom's death and not being able to engage in it. So I saw him withdraw. I saw him not be himself. And that's when I discovered I didn't know how to be there for him. I didn't know what to do except telling him, you don't have a choice. You need to just go to the hospital and see her. You can't just hide. And I was more the obligation person because that's how I grew up. You don't do what you do what you have to do. And so that's sort of when we started going downhill. And how does a good marriage get in trouble? You ask your close friend to help you out. And you say, listen, you know what it's like to have lost parents. Can you help him? Can you talk to him? And during a painful time, they connected emotionally.
So how long did it take to restore your marriage? Now, this isn't something that happens overnight, does it?
No, it's not. And from the time I forgave, which was pretty quick, just because I'd experienced the value of forgiveness for myself, I knew that wasn't going to be a choice for me, even if I didn't know the outcome of the marriage. And so from the time forgiveness happened, it took us 2 years to make it better than it ever was before.
So how do you actually go about forgiving this kind of thing? Is it an ongoing process?
It's yes and no. The forgiveness part was a decision I made because I realized that even if the marriage didn't work out, I didn't want to carry that with me. And so forgiveness was really something I did for myself. I had to see that neither one of them, and for my benefit, I was able to see through the eyes of compassion. I was able to say, neither my friend nor my husband meant evil against me. This happened. And I think for most people that have been betrayed, if you could just focus on that first. Did they really mean to hurt you, or did maybe boundaries get crossed? The Bible says flee, and you didn't. When temptation hits, you're supposed to flee. You're not supposed to walk away. You're supposed to run away. You're supposed to go with all your might. And there's a reason for that. And to my husband's credit, he was really passionate about explaining that after the affair. He said, listen, even if a feeling feels good, you're already in the flee zone. Get out, So if somebody gives you a compliment and that feels good, get out of there, because the enemy will build on that. And so that was very powerful for us to learn, that it felt like they weren't doing anything wrong, but feelings. And that's where a lot of, these Facebook affairs happened. And it happens pretty innocently quite often.
Now, Tina, it's one thing to forgive someone, but it's another matter entirely to develop trust in your spouse again. How do you go about doing that?
Oh, that question. Okay, so that haunted me, because at the very beginning of our healing, that was the question my family had. That was the question that best friends had, and people that loved us. How will you trust him again? Okay, so you want to reconcile. You've forgiven him. Great. How will you trust? And that plagued me, and it was haunting. And I'll be really honest, I never trusted again. I don't believe in trust, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe that for me, what happened was a miracle. I remember it was about 2-3 weeks where this question of trust was very haunting. And I went to church. And at that time, I was going to Victory Christian Center here in Surrey. We lived in Vancouver with John and Helen Burns. And I attended a service by myself. I sat in the very back row. I didn't want to see anybody. We were 2 weeks out, so the pain was real. My husband wouldn't even go to church because of the shame. So I went by myself, and I remember Pastor John stopping in the middle of his message and going, I don't know who this is for, it has nothing to do with my message, but here's what I've got to say to you. God never told you to trust people. He said, trust God and love people. And I walked out of there without even listening to the rest of the message. And I said, thank you, Jesus. That was a message that came straight from heaven. My responsibility is for us to let love conquer at this point. But my responsibility is to trust you, God, with my heart. I can't trust another human with my heart or my life. That is God's prerogative, and I was able to do that. I was able to say, no matter what happens, no matter what evil is set against us, he will turn it to good. And so I had to really make that conscious decision and to this day I live that way, even with friendships, and I've said to friends, if I came to you and said, I've been hurt in friendships before, so I really need to trust you that you're not going to hurt me. That's putting such an expectation on you to do right by me. And that's just not fair. So in our marriage, we really decided to start developing safety and building boundaries around our marriage and healing from our past, because so many things we had dragged into our marriage from the past, I dragged in that I couldn't be there and be nurturing, because I'd been hurt by showing nurture. And I didn't ever want to be hurt like that again. And I talk about that in my book. I talk about some of the vows we make as children. And then we bring it into our marriage. I promised myself I would never get hurt again by a man, right? And that was how I protected myself in my marriage. I just wouldn't get too close.
Is it possible for a relationship to be stronger after infidelity? I think about when I broke my arm once, and then my doctor says, once the bone heals itself, it'll be even stronger than it was originally. So is it possible to be stronger?
It is so possible. It was for us because we had to really look at ourselves. And one of the things that I've been criticized for is taking responsibility. Because one of the big things I ask myself in the book is I say I've had this mirror moment, with God, where God says, stop being a victim and ask yourself what part you've played in that and what part you've played in this. And so people are taking that to mean that I took responsibility for his affair or her affair. I did not. And I wouldn't want anybody listening or seeing this show to think that anybody should take responsibility for another person's sin or wrongdoing. But I took responsibility for what led up to that because that was our marriage. We were one. What was going wrong in me that wasn't able to be there for my husband when he needed me? And I had to really look at that. And so, yes, I didn't know that about bones can be stronger. But that's great. I'm going to use that because I didn't know that. But yes, our marriage was much stronger. You know why? Because we filled the holes. We filled the fear. Our marriage was no longer built on fear of it being destroyed or on fear of being hurt. It was built on trusting God and loving each other.
So what are the first things a spouse should do after finding out that there's been an affair? Are there maybe good and bad ways to respond?
Well, we have been running personal intensives for marriages for the last 25 years, and our program is called Relationship Lifeline. And people can get help there. They can read the book, of course, and there's lots in there. And I give a lot of tips in the book of how to get through the first 24 hours, how to get through the next week. But the first thing is, if you're a believer, trust God that he does not mean this for destruction, and he can take this and make it better than it was before. And we've developed a program called the R3 Factor, and we really take you through a process of healing. The first being the R1 is really to reveal. You can't change or heal what you don't reveal in yourself. I had to see what was broken in me first, and what was broken in me went back many years before I got married, and I brought that into my marriage. And then the R2 is really, you can't change what happened in the past, but you can rewrite the story. You can rewrite the story that's written on your heart. You were not created to be a failure. You were not created to feel shame. You were created to be in the love zone. That's what we were created. So I teach about living above the line where there's love, and under the line is fear. And quite often we live in fear. And so it's looking at being able to rewrite those things that were meant to destroy us. And then the third, of course, is the most fun part, and that is the renew. And that's what we did. When we renewed our marriage, it was better than it ever was before. I didn't know two people could be that intimate emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, in every way. And when I lost my husband 5 years ago, I lost half of me. I lost the man that completed me really here on earth. But because I, again, go back to trusting God, I am complete in Christ.
So how do you protect your children when you're going through the process of restoring a marriage, Tina?
Well, that is something that I really want to speak to very strongly, because at the end of the day, when God said to me, don't you be a victim, it's because as an adult, we are not victims. Children are. And a lot of the things that I work with couples is make sure that when you're having, we used to call it my crazy time, that you at least care for your children. And there are many crazy times during that 2-year period. And what I would say is be guarded for your kids. So don't try to not fight. Don't try to not expose. Don't try to not be in that reveal process. But somehow, with every fiber in you, think about them. They're the innocent ones. They're the ones so set times. Maybe they're in school, right? Maybe you take fight nights and take it out of the house. Maybe you take those times where you set, because, if you think that you can just get over it, you can't. Get help. But in all of that, maybe it's about taking the kids to the grandparents for a weekend when you know you need to just get it off your chest. We had to do that. We had to take times where I could just release a lot of the emotions that were inside me. A lot of nights were spent crying after the children were in bed, but we built rules of engagement in our home. And those are so important. And that's why I say get help, because there's a lot more involved to you healing than just you. And you're the adult. You don't have to stay a victim. The children now are victims and they don't know what's going on. And they shouldn't have to know every detail either.
You offer couples retreats for those struggling in their relationships. What do they actually look like, and do they actually work?
They do work. And, we work with some of the biggest churches in Southern California and Canada. And right now, we still, after 25 years, have a 90% success rate of couples getting back together that are separated or in crisis mode. So when that reveal process happens, I can't even explain to you how much healing happens. And why are we different than most couples conferences or couples, people say it sounds too good to be true, so it can't be true. It's so true that we're willing to give you your money back if it doesn't work for you personally to heal. Not all marriages make it, but they will all personally, as a person, learn how to heal. And they will heal because it's your heart that needs to heal, and we don't deal with the marriage as much as we deal with your personal heart. Jesus said in Matthew 19:8 that divorce was allowed because of the hardness of the heart. So why do I have such credibility and faith in what we do? Is because we take what Jesus said, it wasn't so in the beginning. So if the hardness of the heart is not meant to be there, and that's what causes divorce, then let's look where the hardness of the heart came from. And let's put our faith that in Christ, if we trust him, he'll soften our hearts because we give our heart to him, not to a spouse or a friend, right? We give our hearts to him, and in that way we can heal.
Amen. Tina Conkin, author of How God Used the Other Woman, Saving Your Marriage After Infidelity. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Vancouver, BC.
Thank you for having me on.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.